Financial Survival Network, helping you survive and thrive in the new economy. Go to CarrieLutz.com and sign up for 30 free micro trainings on financial survival.
Great news. We've got a sponsor. This show is now brought to you by Miles Franklin. And when it comes to protecting your wealth, you know there's nothing better than gold and silver. That's what I'm buying. I hope you're doing the same. And once you make the decision to buy gold and silver, there's no better place than Miles Franklin. Look, they've been in business 22 years. And the reason I'm a customer is because when you buy, they ship. Go to milesfranklin.com or call them at 800-822-8080 to get a free quote. Are you worried about the future of the dollar and paper currency? Do you think that a gold standard is actually going to save us? And what about those central banks? Are they barbarous relics from the past? Well, John Butler, author of Golden Revolution, has got a unique perspective on things. I think you need to listen to him. John, welcome to the Financial Survival Network.
Thanks, Carrie. Pleased to be here.
So congratulations. The book has released in electronic form. How's that feel?
Feels good. I mean, the manuscript was completed several months ago. We've been going back and forth with editing and whatnot, and of course the book went into production more recently, but it is satisfying. It's satisfying to see that it's out there, and I'm pleased at the initial reception it's getting.
And you think it's going to make a difference?
It's very difficult to know. The nature of tipping points is that you simply can't see them in advance. And in fact, even in retrospect, in hindsight, it's difficult sometimes to identify, which straw broke the camel's back. I like to think I have offered up here in this book a timely, persuasive, informative contribution to the critical debate of how we are going to basically implement some sensible monetary reform and allow sustainable, healthy growth to reestablish itself at some point in future. So I have to hope, I suppose.
My personal feeling is it's going to add to the debate. Like you said, there's tipping points. There's a lot of things that build up, that create these inflection points, and there's a knowledge base that needs to be built up about this gold standard, this Austrian economic model, and it's been lacking up to now because the internet is the great equalizer. It's bringing the information, but for 50 years in the United States, nobody knew about the Austrian School of Economics except a bunch of cranks down in Alabama. So things are definitely piling on. And what I liken it to is the early days of jet aircraft flying, much more dangerous than they are today. And a lot of that is because the technology that we have now is far superior, but the knowledge base of the pilots who are guiding the craft and the ability to anticipate emergencies and the quality of the training is so much better that we don't have accidents that 30 years ago would end in disaster. Now it's a close call, but they managed to land the plane safely. And I think that's what books like yours and Currency Wars, to a lesser degree, I think, are contributing to the debate.
Well, I certainly hope so. And it's interesting you mentioned Currency Wars there. There are certain topics, there are certain themes that the Golden Revolution shares with Currency Wars. And in fact, I do maintain an occasional correspondence with Jim Rickards. But my book, ultimately, it goes much farther with those topics, and it is also informed with an Austrian perspective, very, very clearly and explicitly informed, and as such, those who are of that persuasion, I think ultimately will find my book more compelling.
Yeah, I told you I really enjoyed Currency Wars, especially from the standpoint that it's effectively a non-military war, and they're in this war room fighting an economic war. And to some extent, I see that as kind of the sideshow to the whole thing, because the light that he sheds on the history of the monetary system that we currently have, its unsustainability, and the necessity of gold, and why gold got demonetized and demonized for that matter, I think really furthers the debate. So unfortunately, I haven't had a chance to download your book yet, but I really can hardly wait because, like you said, I think Rickards took it to a point, but he also acted like, oh, we have to start planning because in 10 years we're going to have a problem. We have the problem right now. We probably have 12 months to 24 months to sort this out, and nobody's even talking about it, are they?
Well, I mean, certainly there is a sense of urgency in certain circles, but those circles are not the circles that are in power and are at the peak of influence. But there are those of us who do have a greater sense of urgency. In my book, one of the chapters is devoted to a hypothetical future scenario in which the U.S. is overtaken by events elsewhere and finds itself facing a very, very sudden and severe economic crisis, which makes what we've experienced in recent years look rather tame by comparison. I set that scenario in August 2013, and I did so because I actually felt that that was a plausible time frame within which this sort of hugely disruptive scenario could manifest itself.
Yeah, and here we are. We talked about your book. You came on a few months back. The crisis is worsening, regardless what they say. I mean, I have friends that say, oh, I thought the economy was getting better. And I'm like, okay, where you live, there's nothing wrong with the economy. Where the rest of the country lives, there's a lot wrong. So the deterioration that's manifested itself and the collapse, the entropic decay of the system is becoming more and more evident every day, right?
Oh, indeed. And this is, in fact, something which I also touch on in the book, and which is also the core subject matter of the forthcoming edition of my newsletter. I also produce a regular newsletter, and I try to make the point that time is not on our side. That there is this view that even if policymakers don't necessarily know what they're doing, that eventually, if you wait long enough, the economy will sort itself out, will restructure, and we will be able to assume once again some form of healthy, sustainable economic growth. The book makes the point, and this forthcoming newsletter makes the point, that that is simply not true. Without fundamental monetary reform, we are not going to be able to avoid a deterioration in our standard of living and in the productive capacity of our economy. We actually need to take these actions, or these actions need to somehow be forced through the system by hook or crook, if we want to get back to something which feels like real economic progress.
Right. You know what it reminds me of? There's a Jerry Seinfeld skit where, he's talking about you get into the taxi and how many people buckle their seatbelt when they get into a taxi. And it's like, he says, oh, I'm in there with my friend, and, we get in there, and I said, shouldn't you buckle your seatbelt? He says, no, he knows what he's doing. He's the taxi driver. And it's like, this guy is a maniac. He's going all over the place. And that's the way we entrust our leaders, and especially the leaders of the central banks, is, oh, they know what they're doing. Don't worry about a thing. And nothing, in fact, could be further from the truth, as witnessed by the ever and perpetual decline in the purchasing power of paper currencies.
Well, certainly the record of paper currencies is dismal. In fact, what we've experienced so far with the unbacked fiat dollar 40 years on is still relatively tame if you take a longer-term historical comparison. I mean, if you read Fiat Money Inflation in France by Andrew Dexter White, I mean, that is actually a relatively short read, and it may be written in a style which is a bit old-fashioned, but actually it reads, nevertheless, the subject matter is just so engaging. I could hardly put the thing down when I read it some years back. And there are other, there are accounts of the German Weimar hyperinflation, Adam Ferguson, When Money Dies, which are just gripping reads, but they're also horror stories. They are horror stories, and I just hope that we can try, once again, through whatever contribution we can each make, to try and move this debate forward quickly enough and resolve these issues quickly enough such that we ourselves will not have to endure that sort of economic horror show which we've seen take place, unfortunately, so many times in the past.
Yeah, well, it reminds me of an old saying that if you listen to the show, you know what I'm talking about. The one thing that we learn from history is that people don't learn from history. And I'm afraid that we're back to square one here. I wish I could be more optimistic about it, but, there can be no good printing up all these extra currency units. It's better to manage the collapse than to run from the collapse right into the arms of a bigger collapse. And that's what we're doing here. And I hope common sense will prevail. But as my father-in-law used to say, if it's so common, how come so few people have it?
Very true, and certainly I would argue that the current economic mainstream, which is obviously what policymakers generally draw upon when trying to figure out what to do with the mess they've made, that mainstream is just so lacking in basic, fundamental common sense. It makes you wonder. Economics is supposed to be about common sense. If you read about how economics originated as a discipline, it was all about the real nuts and bolts basics of how do you most efficiently allocate scarce resources across an economy. What mechanisms can accomplish that? How can you enable those mechanisms to improve over time? And today, mainstream economics is so overrun with statistics and time series analysis and God knows what else. It's been completely overrun. Its common sense supply lines have been cut.
Yeah.
It's completely lost it. It's completely lost the common sense, and it will be difficult to bring that common sense back without things first getting worse. But my book is ultimately optimistic. My book, and people may disagree with this, but my book is ultimately optimistic that, in fact, things are coming to a head, that certain actions which are less likely to take place domestically within the United States, and in fact more likely to take place abroad, certain actions are going to force the issue. The issue will be forced in a way which forces us back onto sounder money foundations. And once we are there, the results will be spectacular. We will amaze ourselves with what we can achieve in the U.S. and globally in terms of economic and societal progress once we get ourselves back on that sound money foundation.
I totally agree with you. And sound money will, of necessity, it acts as a brake, as a governor, if you will, on the expenditures of government. Yeah, they can cheat. Our U.S. dollar was backed to 40% backed by gold in the 30s. They can cheat, but they can't cheat to the extent that they can now, where they could just create money out of thin air. It's a combination. Obviously, you have to return to a reality-based economy where you can't spend what you don't earn, and you can't create wealth from the flourish of a pen or a keyboard adding another zero to the currency unit. It's not going to work. We know that. So it's going to, my feeling is, because the solution has to be somewhat political, we're going to have to hit that disaster where there is no other choice, because the government will have zero credibility. The economists out there, the gurus, will have lost all credibility. And then somebody steps forward and says, gold, it's worked before, it'll work again, it can be done, and let's do it now. And that's what it's going to take in my guesstimation. Nothing short of a unmitigated crisis and potential a disaster for humanity.
Certainly, things are going to have to get worse before they get better. My book is, however, on this point also a little bit optimistic. Things may not have to get a whole lot worse before they can get better, but history demonstrates they could get a lot worse. And regardless, gold will be absolutely central in restoring the degree of confidence and trust that's required to get us on sound monetary foundations, and for that, of course, to provide for the general rebuilding of the economy and the progress that could then be enabled. But that progress really could be spectacular. I mean, let's think of it this way. Past monetary disasters tended to be associated with war, which of course is very expensive and has to be paid for and has been paid for through inflation or even hyperinflation, and also occurred at times when you didn't have the same degree of overall global economic integration. It really is a global economy now with all kinds of new entrants. It is fundamentally a positive thing that 1 billion people in emerging markets who never used to have anything to do with the global economy are now trading with us. That is fundamentally a good thing. Economic principles always will tell you, more workers, more capital, always a good thing. Yes, you can discuss and debate about exactly how that labor and capital is distributed around the world, but ultimately it enables greater economic progress. So this time around, we haven't blown each other to bits and destroyed our capital stock. We haven't killed lots of productive young men, or also potentially productive young women. And we are starting with a much larger overall and somewhat increasingly educated, fortunately, global workforce. I mean, these are real fundamental long-term assets. And so, yes, we are going to have to go through a rough patch, but boy, once we get the world back on some sort of sound money foundation, just you wait. You know, we might make the super productive growth of the 19th century look tame in a historical comparison. It's possible.
Yeah, well, the other part of that equation is that those people who are now producing also have wants and needs. A lot of their wants and needs they didn't even know could be fulfilled. And I remember being at a discussion, a guy by the name of Ralph Winter. He runs a fund called the Wintergreen Fund, and it's a value-based thing. But this was about 5-6 years ago, and he's talking about the emergence of Asia, and he says people there, they want that refrigerator. They want to have an oven. They want the flat screen TV. They want all these things that Western societies just take for granted. And the demand coming there is going to have to be satisfied, and it's going to drive a technological revolution, a production revolution. The way that things are made now, it's totally going to change. The energy is going to change. I believe that. I don't think the government should be fostering it and picking winners and losers, because technology is too tricky for the professionals, let alone those pointy-headed bureaucrats in Washington and London and Brussels to figure out. Nobody can figure out what that next technology is going to be. Nobody anticipated the personal computer, the local area network, the internet, and the smartphone. So let the market handle it is really what it comes down to. So anyway, your book, where do we find it, and how do we subscribe to your newsletter, John?
The newsletter is posted to my website and also a handful of other financial websites, and I'm pleased to hear that you're interested in picking it up. But my website is www.amphora-alpha.com. That's AMPHORA-alpha.com. And if you click your way through to the Amphora Report, you will find an archive of the newsletters there, as well as, of course, always the most recent edition.
Excellent. Hey, well, we're looking forward to the book. We're going to post a link to carrylutz.com, where we'll also carry your newsletter. And so anybody who wants to get John's newsletter, which I like a lot, just go to carrylutz.com, subscribe, and we'll start putting the link in the newsletter as well. And John, hey, good luck with the book. We're looking forward to your U.S. book tour, and we'll catch up with you when you come over.
Fantastic. Thanks, Kerry.
All right. Thank you.